Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here and not out watching the eclipse. I'm sure that's more entertaining, though. I'll call this meeting to order. Ms. McKay, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Pons?
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Here.
Okay, we have one matter of special privilege, and that's the consideration and approval of a remote participation request from Council Member Stacy Kern-Shearer for the April 8th, 2024 City Council work session. Rivet, any comments? No?
No, sir.
Okay. Would somebody like to make that motion to approve participation?
Yes, so I move that we approve remote participation for Councilmember Stacy Kern-Shearer for today's meeting.
Second.
Ms. McKay?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Welcome, Ms. Kern-Shearer.
Thank you. I'm glad you all passed that motion. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. Hi, everybody.
Okay, takes us to items for City Council's meeting. Trivet, you want to give the council a preview?
Certainly. So we have two public hearings on the agenda. We'll be adding a third I'll talk about in just a second. The first is to rezone property at 530 Mill Neck Road, and the second one is to consider a text change to alter the years of buildings that can be constructed in a historic district. And the third one is actually advertised, but we haven't gotten it on the agenda yet, is the budget public hearing that's required. So we'll get that added later today. Under the reports section, our operating reports, we're probably going to have two of them, and that's going to include Human Services, talking a little bit about what they're doing, as well as the Police Department accepting an award that we talked about with you all earlier that they were applying for. Under new business, we have the re-execution of the mutual aid agreement, regional mutual aid agreement, as well as a task order to construct or to complete the street infrastructure and stormwater management update for the master plan. And then a consideration of bids for the flashing yellow signal modification project, and the final item will be a budget amendment.
Okay, thank you. It takes us now to public comments, which is an opportunity for anybody to come forward and address council on whatever's on their mind. I do have one speaker's card, so I'll go ahead and call that up now. Will Katabian? Did I say it right? Welcome, sir. Could you just state your name and address for the record, please?
Of course. My name is Will Katabian. I live at 280 Harrison Avenue. Awesome. Okay. Hello, Mr. Mayor and Councilman. Like I said, my name is Will Katabian. I'm the current president of Our Williamsburg. In the past, I've spoken here about the need for affordable housing within walking distance of the campus. Unfortunately, we are here for a different reason today. Recently, the police presence in Williamsburg has gotten out of hand. Never have I seen so much unrest among the student body. Students are scared to even walk down Richmond Road at night for fear of being arrested. Our Williamsburg, of course, speaks for these students, and we released a poll this past week to ask what they felt were the biggest problems facing them as students, and here's what they had to say. Specifically, harassment from William & Mary Police Department, fear of being arrested, lack of respect, excessive traffic stops, and the feeling of being lesser in the face of the city. We, the students, feel more isolated than ever, despite our constant contributions to the city. College is essential and houses over 8,500 student citizens who occupy jobs, spearhead philanthropy, and host the foundation for the future of Williamsburg. We are here and will remain here. Please help us to make Williamsburg a place we can all feel welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would anybody else like to come forward? State your name for the record and address. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Seth Novak. I live on 416 Burbank Street. Yeah, I'm just going to read this off my phone because I just wrote it. But as Will said, there's been an increased surveillance on student activities, especially following the incident with the train tracks last blowout, last day of classes. Understanding that abstinence is not a feasible policy to pursue with regards to underage drinking and just student activities on and off campus, I'm wondering what your guys' thoughts are moving forwards. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences for people breaking the law, but there should be some form of cooperation for there to be a mutually beneficial and respectful relationship between these disparate communities. So I just want to know what your guys' thoughts were on working with the university as well as the students just as individuals to foster safe locations where students can enjoy themselves.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else like to come forward? Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Sorry, my voice is gone, but my
That's
name
okay.
is Kate Carter. And I actually live in a dorm in Tribe Square on the William & Mary campus. And I am the president of our school's Panhellenic Council, which represents like all of the sororities in our school. And I've been hearing like rumors, I'm not sure how true that they are, about, you know, people kind of harassing sorority houses and harassing people kind of like walking along the main Richmond Road. And I know that's a road that people typically take to walk back to their dorms after, you know, wherever they go at night. And due to the increased police activity, it's kind of encouraging people, especially like girls, to like walk home alone rather than in groups for fear of being like stopped and ID'd or questioned. And that might not be what they want at that time. And so that's also kind of raising some sort of like safety concern. And I just wanted to bring that here kind of to echo the sentiments that my colleagues have also brought forth. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anybody else like to come forward? Sir.
All right, my name is Andrew Barnett. I live at 220 Rolfe Road. To say similar things to what Will and Seth had said, it seems like the increased police presence is really kind of separating our community. The students here love this town, love being in Williamsburg, but they've made it much, much harder to kind of have our student activities and exist here in the community as students and want to be participating in the full community. You may have heard that there's a housing crisis at William & Mary. People are being forced either to move far, far away or to live on campus where there isn't enough housing. And in the areas directly around campus, people don't necessarily feel safe or included in those communities to join those places. I just want to say for a couple of my members, I'm the president of Kappa Delta Rho fraternity. A couple of my members who received a noise citation at about 10:50 before the noise ordinance truly kicked in. They had police officers sitting outside of their house waiting for 11 o'clock to kick in. And the police officer who came up to them justified that with the broken windows theory, which basically says that if you stop crime now, you stop smaller crimes now, you prevent bigger crimes in the future. I think that that theory is non-existent. It's been disproven many times by real studies. You're not actually stopping college students from doing normal college behaviors. You're just going to make the situation more dangerous in those places. We referenced the last day of classes last year where they were found that students were on the train tracks back behind a house. The police had corralled all of the students into one place that was immediately abutting the train tracks. Not saying that people should be going on the train tracks, but in that situation, people don't feel like they have a place to go. It doesn't feel to me that police officers are responding to the needs of the community, but it does feel like they're seeking out students in an attempt to punish them.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Would anybody else like to come forward? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and there are quite a few things in that I heard. In general, we don't respond to comments, but the student body is an important aspect of our community. Don't think for a minute that any one of us on council or even in this community don't believe that and understand that. And we aspire to make sure that you all have a wonderful time here in Williamsburg, but also a safe time here in Williamsburg. And I wonder if I can get the chief just to come forward and talk a little bit about some of what we heard in terms of enforcement and where we're at with some of these issues.
Sir, good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of
Thank you for
council.
coming forward.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. And I appreciate the students that are here. I think this is democracy in action, and I appreciate that very much. As some of you may know, we have been in conversation with some of the student body, and believe me when I tell you that your feedback and your input is extremely important to us. I'll talk about some of the concerns that we're trying to address, that we're trying to change. But before I do that, I do want to say that, you know, it isn't that our policy has changed. The past few weekends, there have been a number of different interactions with law enforcement But for years, we've had an increased police presence in the areas in the vicinity of campus to try to do everything we can to help keep you guys safe. That's included, those areas where there's a lot more pedestrian activity, and particularly those areas where there's a lot more pedestrian activity and a lot of drinking, whether of age or underage, certainly a lot more drinking. And so the police department certainly has a duty, a responsibility to do our very best to try to help to manage those areas, those corridors, so that we have the safest environment absolutely possible. Fast forward, LDOC, the past couple of years, and from my perception, and this may not be entirely accurate, but it's certainly my perception, and I've been at every single last day of class, blowout, whatever you want to call it, for the past, I guess going on 7 years now. And at each of those incidents, there's always been large numbers of crowds, but quite honestly, for a number of years, while it might have been some disturbance to the community, I didn't feel like we had necessarily the magnitude of what I'll call the intoxication that we've seen the past few years. Again, from my perception, it would seem that it's a result of the gallon-sized containers of alcohol that students commonly refer to as Borg, and I can't tell you exactly what that stands for right now, but it certainly seems that in the past few semesters, I should say, there's been an increase of young people with Borgs. And I just think that the level of intoxication as a result of that alcohol consumption has just gotten to the point of being really unsafe. About a year ago, I believe it was the May blowout a year ago, we had a situation where we had, at one time, approximately 15 students who were in the emergency department at Riverside Doctors Hospital because of severe levels of alcohol and intoxication. During that time, as you might imagine, we don't have hospital space for 15 folks at our emergency department on top of any other emergencies that we might have in our community. And so unfortunately, folks that were sick, rather than responding to that emergency department, had to be diverted and had to go to emergency departments that maybe this would have been a closer department, but now they're further departments. And, and unfortunately, it's a disservice to the entire community. It's a tremendous strain on our police personnel, on our fire, EMS personnel, and on our hospital staff and capacity. And so more recently, we had a situation where, and it was referenced the trains, and I appreciate you guys bringing that up. We had 3 or 4 students that were on the train tracks. There was a very large party on Lafayette. I mean, it was just elbow to elbow in the backyard of this particular property. And folks basically went all the way back just about to the train tracks, and then some of the folks that were there actually spilled onto the train tracks. As a result of that, we ended train service in the city for 20 minutes or so, thereabouts. For the safety of the students that were on the tracks. 3 students were charged during that incident, and it seemed like the appropriate, the reasonable thing to do. On last day of class, on blowout, myself included, there are about 15 police officers roaming the city, doing our very, very, very best to keep the students safe, to do everything we can to make sure that there's not a pedestrian accident. That party that I referenced on Lafayette, we had a situation where traffic just could not move down Lafayette. And so literally we were standing, kind of trying to keep the young people who had been at the party drinking, kind of keep in the back so that we could let traffic go, and then we would let the students walk and hold traffic. And it just got to the point where it literally within just a foot or so of my fingertips, 3 females who were extremely intoxicated, they were arm in arm, literally walked right beyond me where I was trying to hold the students back. And in front of a passing, it happened to be a Lexus. And fortunately, she was going extremely slow, and fortunately, she slammed on brakes, and we did not have an accident. But it is certainly the type of thing that keeps us up at night. And I can tell you, in spite of our very, very, very best effort, and I know that the students, what you're hearing from today are the students that maybe have some concerns with what they perceive as the police presence. That goes back 2 or 3 weeks when they had a particularly busy weekend. We had not overstaffed. We had not done anything different. During the course of that 3-day period, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, we had somewhere around 10 different noise issues that we found. Some of those we found as a result of officers being proactive in these areas, trying our very best to help you guys so that you're keeping the noise, keeping the volume, keeping the issues down so that you're not cited. The last thing that we want to do is charge you for whether it's drunk in public, noise, underage, whatever the case may be. You know, oftentimes when I meet with students, I say to them, on any particular Friday or Saturday night, we could issue 50, 100, 200 summonses for underage possession of alcohol. This year, we've issued about 5, right? I mean, a very, very, very small number. On that particular weekend that we referenced 3 weekends ago, I think now, we had, of the 9 or 10, maybe 11 houses that we went to for noise issues, majority of those were where officers, you know, proactive went. But one of those we had gotten called to on 3 separate occasions. And on that third occasion, we issued noise violations to 2 of the folks that were there. And I mean, you know, it's like we do our very best with the student body to, hey, help us to help you. I mean, we really do. We want a wonderful situation. We want their peace and harmony. We want the students to have a great time here. But we've got to do it in a manner that's safe. Another thing that I've recently said to one of the students that I met with is, you know, there's no doubt about it. Students, student admin, city leadership have all come to us and said, hey, blowout has gotten out of hand. Community members have come to us. I mean, there aren't too many folks, except maybe the folks that are in this room with us now, but there aren't too many folks, I think, that would disagree with the fact that blowout has gotten to a level that we just can't handle. And, you know, unfortunately, I've been in this business 31 years, and I've seen a lot of things, unfortunately, not all positive. And so one of the things that I think about as I do my job, and whether it's dealing with student issues or a homeless situation or whatever the case, you know, what happens if we're not doing enough? What happens if we're not doing enough and something bad, something really incredibly bad, and this is not an exaggeration, it happens at campuses across the country. If it gets to the point where a student maybe falls out of a tree, as happened about a year ago, gets hit by a train, as could have happened, or just gets hit by a car walking home, or just goes to bed at night and doesn't wake up the next morning because of the alcohol. So I have to ask myself, what am I going to tell that student's parents if they come to me and ask me, hey, Chief, what'd you do about this? What did the Williamsburg Police Department do about this issue? You have known for years that it's been ramping up with a blowout with the last day of class. It's getting more and more and more animated. And we're working with students. We're doing everything we can, because the last thing that we want to do is have to rely on enforcement. And I really do. I think we all would agree enforcement is really not the first approach that we want. We want conversation, we want dialogue, we want to work together. But we've absolutely got to have a safer event. And, you know, if the students and the student bodies working together can't help to create that, then the police department is going to have to rely on enforcement. And it certainly isn't what we want to do, but that certainly is a very appropriate response.
Well, thank you, Chief, and I appreciate your comments. And as I listen to you, you know, I share those sentiments. You know, the police department has a responsibility to ensure the safety of all of us in this community, but there has been a change in behavior, and I've been in town longer than the chief has, and seen an escalation of large parties, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about in these blowout parties. And as much as they have a responsibility, I think the student body has a responsibility. And I hope that as you move forward, you know, help one another, take care of one another. Don't, you know, with the alcohol consumption, staying off the railroad tracks, keeping the noise down at the right hours. You know, I think, you know, and I know I meet with the university once a month and we have this conversation. There's got to be an opportunity for you all to have bigger parties on campus. I don't know how you would achieve that, but that might be something you begin to look at. So,
Mayor Pons, can I quick
Sure.
question? I know it's a little unorthodox. Chief Dunn, thank you for coming in and responding. I also really appreciate students for taking time out of your day and coming to talk to council and speak to our law enforcement. So not many years ago, I was a student here, and I actually see this as a pretty great opportunity to address with campus leaders, right, presidents of fraternities or the Panhellenic Council, what their member groups should be aware of going into LDOC and how they can be safe themselves, right? Can you speak a little bit towards how a student should go into that day, whether they're planning or not, to be celebratory, and do so with the belief that if they, you know, adhere to this, that, or the other, then they have a low likelihood of having any kind of negative interaction with law enforcement. And I'll quickly say I ask because as long as I've been a student, there has been the almost immediate response from W and WMPD to blowout because it's a centralized location, right? I mean, you wouldn't have to know the address to hear it and then say it's that street, right?
Sure.
But it's usually not unless there's been people passing out, openly vomiting, that there's any kind of response in a more punitive measure.
Sure.
So, you mentioned like having to stop Amtrak service and the Borgs, right? What are some maybe good things for our students who are conscientious in wanting to have a good time in Williamsburg, but do so without having something on the record, certainly? What are ways that they could, or things they could take to their member groups or friends, and how to approach blowout
Sure.
Safely from both fun, but also, outcomes?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. We have been working with campus leadership. We've been working with my counterpart, Chief Butler, and his team at the Williamsburg Police Department. We've met. I mean, this really is a unified, I think, approach, a concerted effort to try to have a safer blowout for us. I'm under the impression that there are events planned on campus at a greater scale than what have been on campus in previous years. I think for some number of years there have been events in Sunken Gardens, as I understand it, and I think this year there's going to be a bit more, which I think is a great thing. I'm also under the impression that at least as of last week, there were the typical fraternity groups that would have events off campus during blowout. We're not going to do that, and I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think that's great. I can tell you we are not opposed to these daytime events. I mean, if they're done, safely, without disruption to the community, without the level of intoxication, I mean, the urinating in public, the vomiting, the overloading our, EMS and our hospital systems, we welcome that. I mean, we think that's a great thing, and I think there's a lot of room for these daytime events. I know a lot of the fraternities have been shifting towards that. I think that's a great idea. It allows us to have the opportunity to, with the students during the day, to come by and have have conversation, have that engagement, which, believe me, it is extremely important to us. And so I encourage you to continue that. If any of the students choose to discuss this or any other issue with me, my door is always open. I welcome the conversation. I can assure you, I'm sure, I don't want to mention anyone's name, but I can assure you, some of the folks that have been meeting with me. I suspect if you ask them what that's like, they'll find that I'm a very pleasant person to speak with, and I'm more than happy to talk to you and hear your concerns. And there are also situations where if you're going to have events and you're going to do whatever the activity may be. If you want the police department to know, if you send me an email or send one of the guys an email, we like to know that. We like to have a contact number. That way, so that we can help you to prevent an issue, we've at least got a point of contact to be able to reach out to. So we certainly welcome that as well. And we've had a number of very responsible events over the years where we've had the folks that are hosting the event, that they do know that, hey, look, if you have a college party, that's a possibility that it could get out of hand, and instead of being 30 of your closest friends, it's 300 of your fellow students. And so we like having the relationship with them that, hey, if it gets to the point where it's more than what you had in mind and you want us to come by to help you kind of get some folks out of your property, we're more than happy to do that as well. So believe me when I say we are a partner, we are a strong partner, we are an advocate for our students. We want it to be a safer event. I do not want to be talking to any of your parents about something that went terribly wrong, and then when they're asked what we did about it, and then, I need to be able to say with a satisfactory response that we did everything we could to keep you guys safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Dunn. I think we'll leave it there, and, we're always available if you want to communicate with us, and certainly the chief is. Hope you got that message today. Okay, takes us on to background presentations and discussions, and item A is presentation and discussion concerning the fiscal year FY25 City Manager's proposed budget. Mr. Trivett.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. It's that time of year again where we start our budget journey. So I'm going to go through the presentation today, and I want to preface it by saying this is not going to look a whole lot different from what we presented to you back in February at the fiscal retreat. There's not been a lot of change, and it's still a pretty vanilla budget in terms of what's included and what's not included. So with that, we'll just dig in. As you all know, this is our course map. We stuck with the race theme again this year. We are in April, so we've got quite a bit of lifting yet to do. It happens fairly quickly as we go from April to May, which is the City Council's target adoption date for the budget. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to cover the remaining opportunities for people to provide public comment in a forum like this. So the budget this year is $94.1 million in total for all funds. And, you know, what's significant about that is, and people are probably wondering when this will end, but there's a whole host of projects included in this budget that are causing that number to be inflated over what it typically is. Normally our budget, if you're just looking at an average year, has been $65 to $70 million. And this year we're continuing at 94.1. But if you look at that, the vast majority of that is driven by projects in the CIP related to bonds and grant-funded projects and things like that will eventually come off of the roster as the projects are completed and the funds expended, and those overall numbers should trend back down to what is typical. So what are the budget drivers? What are the things contributing to the budget proposal that we put together? Here are just the four that we normally talk about. This year, the first is public education. As you all know, this is a topic that the community is wrestling with on a much grander scale. But still, we are operating under our joint contract with James City County for WJCC. Every year, they submit a budget request that goes to us and the county. Typically, what we do is the City Council tries to budget what has been asked for by the school district. And then we either scale that up or scale that down based on how our larger funding partner in the school system, the county, reacts to that request. This year we have the advantage of having a little bit of information based on what the county has proposed. And so this proposed budget, as you have it in the draft, funds the operating request from WJCC entirely at 100% and scales back the capital request to match what we anticipate to be funded by the county. They have reduced some of those projects that were submitted or pushed them out or advance funded them to a degree, and that is what's contributing to the difference there. Debt service. This is a major driver of this year's budget. As you all know, last year we really focused on a couple of different strategic priorities in terms of what we were trying to fund. One of the biggest ones was the debt service associated with some of the public projects. And those projects include the police station, the fire station, and the library. And as you can see here, the thermometer, as we like to call them, all the way on the left, shows you that this budget, the FY25 proposed budget, fully funds the debt service required for the police station and the library. The thermometer on the right shows you what it means to add in another project. In this case, we chose the live performance venue so that you can see, based on what we expect that cost to be, if we wanted to include that in the bonded debt of the city, how much more money we would need in terms of debt service. And that's really just there for reference. I think it's important just to pause here for a moment and point out that this is showing you the debt service of the general fund paid through the CIP. What's significant about that is the Sports Center project, the project that's most often talked about, is not included in this list. And that's because it is not being funded through the debt service of the city or through the general fund. And so when we talk about meeting that strategic priority of debt service, we're not talking about that project specifically. It's funded in an entirely different way, and I'll talk about that when we get to the tourism fund. The next driver is revenue growth. Over the last few years, what we have seen is really a pretty aggressive revenue growth stream in just about every significant revenue source, particularly related to the assessed values of the city. And so what we saw this year, though, was a slight change in that. In the last few years, the assessed values have grown by double digits, and this year that trend has slowed down and we're back into single-digit territory. In fact, for the first time, as far as I know, in a long time, we actually had 88 properties in the city that had depreciated values. And I want to just pause for a second and highlight the fact that, I think Derek is here if we want to get really deep into the woods on the assessment process. The city manager and the city council are in no way involved in setting the assessed values of the city. It is entirely based on his method of reviewing sales versus assessed values as they are right now. And so if a house in your neighborhood sells for a higher value than what we anticipated, and the difference between that sales value and your home assessed value is 96%, then you can expect that number to be adjusted in the next assessed value period, and we do that every year. And so that's how it works. The city council and the city manager have no role in setting that value. We point that out because revenue growth is an important component of estimating what we're going to be able to pay for as we go into the fiscal year. And just like with every other cost, our cost of providing the same services increase, and we need to be able to meet them. And our goal is absolutely to meet them with the revenue that we have. And so as we think about revenue growth, whether it be from sales tax or lodging tax or the assessed values, all of that is going toward first meeting the needs of providing the services that we already provide. And along those lines, that is, in fact, the last budget driver of this budget. As I said earlier, this is sort of a vanilla budget because there's not a lot of new things included in it. It pretty much is just paying for the services that we already provide and the programs that we already provide. And that's shown here. What we're trying to illustrate is just some of the major drivers in that category. As you can see there, some of the outside agencies that we fund, either because they apply for grant funding or because we are in a joint contract and are required to provide funds, like BPRJ, WADA, and the library. All of those costs really increased exponentially this year. Now let's talk about the funds specifically, and we'll start with the CIP. As I mentioned earlier, the CIP is where we budget for major projects that have either a long expected lifetime or they have a really high value. And so in the CIP, it can get a little confusing because if you're looking at the capital improvement plan, you see that we're actually programming the expenses for 5 years into the future. The year that matters for the fiscal year budget is obviously the upcoming fiscal year. And that's the amount of money that the city council, when they approve the budget, is actually committing to spending. Now, it gets a little more confusing because we also show in the capital improvement plan all of the revenues that are coming into the city that aren't necessarily tax funds. And so you'll see bond proceeds for projects that we're borrowing for, but you'll also see, probably more importantly, all of the grants associated with projects. And so what we try to do, and there's no great way to do it, is help the public correlate projects in the CIP as expenses to the revenues that are driving them. A good example is this year's FY25 totals set $27.5 million. Much of that has to do with public works renovations associated with the police station project that's already funded, as well as the hope that we receive grant funds to do a major downtown children's park. And we may or may not get that grant, and if we don't, then that project probably won't get completed. But it's still shown as a possibility because we're optimistic. ARPA is something that we're still dealing with. As you all remember, we received considerable funding associated with the pandemic relief generally, whether it was ARPA or CARES funding. And the city council approached this a little differently than a lot of localities did, I think very wisely. They took that money and they set it aside and created grant funds and other opportunities, tax relief, and also incentive funds or seed funds to help spur further investment that would generate revenues in the future. And so as you can see here, we're still tracking all of that money for the various projects that we decided to divvy that up into. And as we move through these projects either becoming real or deciding that they're not going to become real, then we redistribute as needed. And this is a similar report to we give to the city council every month, just to show you that we are keeping track of that funding and that it's available for these projects when they become mature. The next one is the Tourism Fund. This is the fund that was really spurred out of the desire to provide greater transparency by taking all of the tourism expenses in the whole budget and putting them in one place. So if you wanted to see what the city is spending on tourism, sort of like we would with education, it's really easy to go and find that number. In the Tourism Fund, we are paying for all kinds of things like special events, but the majority of the funds still go to the City Council's created grant program, which is where I'm going to take just a minute to pause and talk about the Sports Center. So this fund is really paid for out of half of the city's half of the Historic Triangle sales tax for marketing, as well as some other funds that are transferred in by the general fund. Now, much of the money that gets transferred into the Tourism Fund is sent out to the Regional Tourism Council to assist with marketing. That 0.5% of the sales tax is what's retained to pay for the administration of the programs, the grant process, as well as the city staff and whatnot that are required to administer the money. A few years ago, there was an application through the first ever tourism grant program for a regional sports center. And this was after it had been discussed since 2014. That grant application from the Williamsburg Hotel Motel Association went through the process of independent grant review by the committee and then advanced to the city council, where the city council decided to step ahead and fund the request. And what that did was it set up a source of funding for what we anticipated to be about half of the capital cost of building the facility. Now, the reason that the city council did that at the time was to push the conversation forward with our potential funding partners, the counties, to see if they would seriously entertain a regional partnership to build and operate such a facility. And now, several years later, we have reached the fruition of that, with both counties agreeing to participate and provide operating funds, and of course the city council honoring their commitment through that grant application process 3 years ago now, to push this forward and fund a little more than half of the capital construction costs. Now, the reason that's important is because the tourism fund is entirely driven by the sales tax, lodging taxes that are generated through tourism. And so it goes into the tourism fund and it funds these projects. So when we say that our share of the construction costs of the sports facility is not covered by the general fund and the assessed values, it's because we're paying for it out of the tourism fund and it's funded by those tourism taxes. The utility fund is another one that we don't spend a lot of time talking about very often, and we're going to spend more time in the very near future because we need to start paying attention to its capital needs. I've explained this at the finance retreat, but I think it's a really good way to understand it. The utility fund of the city is an enterprise fund, and it really consists of two components that are similar to business. The first is we manufacture water, and the second is we distribute that water. And so we're really talking about, when we talk about the utility fund and its capital needs, both sides. There are significant capital needs on the horizon at the water treatment plant as well as in the distribution section. Now, we do talk a little bit about the utility rate, and that's how we intend to fund those improvements. And so as we look at this chart that's shown, you can see how our utility rate compares to the rest on the peninsula, and there's a considerable amount of room there. We could raise the rate and still be the lowest on the peninsula, and in many cases in the region. That's not what we're suggesting, but I think it is reasonable to expect in the next few years that we will be looking at the utility rate to compensate for those major upgrades, particularly at the plant, to make sure that we can continue to produce the water that we need. While we're on that topic, I'll just for a minute say that right now our water treatment plant can generate around 7 million gallons a day, and we typically consume, even in the hottest part of the summer, between 2.5, 3 million gallons a day. So we have plenty of excess capacity. That's not the issue. The issue that we need to address with these capital improvements is the equipment that's involved, the hardware that's involved in actually manufacturing that water. And so we're progressing on that front. On Thursday's agenda, as we said, there will be an item that will help us address sort of holistically the capital improvement needs of the Public Works Department, including the utility fund. Debt, of course, is a big factor. As anybody knows, debt can be a tool just as often as it can be a hindrance. And in this case, the city has really enjoyed an extremely low debt profile for a long time. And that's partly because much of the city's infrastructure was all constructed and paid for at the same time. And so we're now currently in that same cycle of having to build some generational buildings associated with providing service. The fire station, the police station, the library, some public housing being great examples of buildings that have reached their end of useful life, and it's time now for us to consider replacing them. Rather than try to pay for that with cash on hand, meaning raising revenue and probably the tax rate, we do that over time, particularly given the lifetime of these buildings that we're building, and finance them with debt. And that allows us to do a lot more in the now versus having to spread it out over a long period of time and continue to deal with failing infrastructure. The strategic priorities, as I said, this shows you how we are working toward those goals. The first one was to meet the debt service, which we've done. The third one we had last year was to really address enhanced benefits packages, and we were able to do that. We still have some tweaks to the benefits package that we're considering, and we'll bring those forward when we're ready. We've been spending a lot of time talking about a few more enhancements that will really help us to continue to be a premier employer in the local government sector, in the region, and certainly on the peninsula. But the second one is the one we've really not made a lot of progress toward. You know, some years ago, we began the process as a community of bringing in to the local government the independent authority, which is the Williamsburg Redevelopment Housing Authority, so that they could be more sustainable and so that we could provide a better experience for the residents of those properties. And we've largely done that, but we never really completed the execution of that merger from a financial perspective. And so we need to really consider that in future years. And to do that, we need to offset the money that we currently get from HUD with city funding. And that's still a target, but not something that we've been able to make progress on in the last 2 years. So this shows you something of the breakdown of what's new in the budget, and you know, it's largely not a lot of new things. We have personnel costs. That's not reflecting a whole host of increased salaries. What that's showing you is the cost of paying the staff that we already have on the books. It does include a moderate cost of living as well as a merit increase that will total around 3.5% once it's actually completed, as well as being able to address our biannual paying class benchmarking process that we began a few years ago. So as it stands right now, we anticipate being able to address both of those within that $1.5 million number. And that's by far a very small portion of that overall cost that is increased largely because of insurances and things like that that the city really has very little control over in terms of cost. Next is the school request. Of course, it grows every year. This year, our portion of it is $886,000, which is included additional service costs we talked about earlier, as well as the outside agency costs. The budget does include 1/2 new FTE, and what this does is it allows us to bring a person into Human Services to relieve the emergency contract work that we've been doing with a host of people who work for other human service agencies to process benefits applications. And the real advantage to doing this is it's going to allow us to have a person on staff in the building to meet with their clients. I think one of the things that it's important to note, though, is this does not help us address the caseload factor. Right now, our caseworkers and benefits have about 700 cases each. That's too many, and we really need to be focused on how we're going to increase staff to bring those case numbers down. Remaining needs, and as you can see here, the vast majority of the remaining needs in the budget are dealing with staff requests from the departments. We begin the budget process in earnest in December when we begin meeting with all the department heads. We offer that opportunity to all the constitutional officers, and we talk about what their needs are in the upcoming fiscal year, and then we match those needs to what we anticipate the revenues to be. And that is how we structure the budget for your finance retreat. As we came into the finance retreat this year, these are things that we were just not able to fund. And as you can see there are excellent needs. These are not things that we don't need. They're just not things that we can afford in the revenues that we have on hand. I want to pause just for a second and say that since we produced this budget and the presentation for today, the Commissioner of Revenue has also requested an additional staff person that's not on this list. So as we finalize the budget and adopt the budget, we'll make sure that we include that in the list of needs that were requested. Obviously, not being able to meet all the needs is troubling, but it's just a factor of trying to live within the means of the revenue that we have on hand. Additionally, things that are not addressed in the budget as it's presented right now are the things that we don't have. So, you know, the actual health department costs, some of the joint activities with James City County, namely the school system, exactly how that will be. We do have actual insurance premiums because we received those at the end of February. And then whatever the state budget might do in terms of state funding, and that's particularly true as it relates to what the school funding might be and teacher increases and how the school board may choose to use that additional funding if they get it. So there's still a lot of things that need to change in this budget before it can be adopted in May. So what are we thinking about as we look for the future of the city's fiscal health? And at the top of our mind is the CIP. As you all know, for many years now, we have been really talking about the CIP's health. The sales tax just isn't capable of supporting it in the way that it always has. And so for many years, we've been transferring money from the general fund to help the CIP. And that's been a successful strategy in that we are able to budget for all of what we would call sort of local local government projects, city projects generally. And that's what you see all the way on the left. On the right is what the CIP's balances look like when we fold in the education projects. Now, I want to be clear. We did not start separating out those two types of projects to highlight the pressure that education puts on our local government, because if you compare it to others, it's really not a lot. We started doing that because the way that we were budgeting in CIP, it just wasn't clear how that money was being spent, when, where, and on what projects. And so separating it out, I think now has been probably 5 years ago and been very helpful. But it does illustrate that as we move into the future of WJCC and some of these capacity building projects, there's a tremendous burden placed on the CIP that as it stands right now, we do not have the revenue to meet. And so as we think about what the future looks like, we're going to need to give considerable consideration to what do those joint projects look like for us, when are they going to get completed, and to what extent are we going to work with the county to make sure that those expenses fall in years where we're able to meet those requests. So as I said, we talked a little bit about where we go from here. The council targets May for its budget adoption, and then it becomes effective in July, and then almost immediately we begin to implement the budget, and it's not so many months later that we start again on the next budget. So when are the opportunities for the public to participate? At today's work session, of course, we're presenting the budget officially. It's been online since the end of March. April the 11th at the regular meeting, we will hold the public hearing on the budget, and it's the opportunity for anybody to come and speak to the budget, its contents, and what they would like to see the council consider prior to adoption. At the work session again, there is the opportunity to come and speak to the city council about the budget, and then hopefully on the May 9th meeting agenda, we will have the budget ready for adoption, including whatever changes the city council might ask us to make between now and that date. With that, Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions, as is Ms. Dammer.
Well, thank you, Mr. City Manager and Ms. Dammer, for all your work putting this together. Certainly a lot of good information. You breezed through it like it's child's play, but it's certainly not. You know, as I looked at many of these budgets now, you know, what always comes to mind is meeting the demands and expectations of our residents. And I think what we have here is a budget that does that in supplying services and, you know, buildings and buildings that, you know, house police officers and firefighters and just general staff. Making sure that we provide those proper environments is important. But you had mentioned the Health and Human Services and the caseloads of our staff, and that's a lot of people that need services that require a lot of people that have to meet those needs, and which creates the demand on the city's budget. And so that's just an example of the need in terms of growth on and impact it has on our budget. And I think for years we've been able to do that with some moderate tax increase in real estate, and we're able to do it again this year without raising taxes. But as we look forward, you know, I can see the pressure, feel the pressure that we're going to have to continue to meet the demands and expectations of our residents. And while I'm not predicting the future, it's going to get tighter. And we mentioned utilities. And while utility operations, there's a utility fund, you know, it's likely we'll see an increase there in the future. But those demands are real. Just remind me what it costs to replace the valves at the bottom of Waller Mill.
We're expecting around $500,000.
Yeah. So these things aren't cheap. And some of that infrastructure there is 80 years old, I think, Mr. Reed was reported to us. And so, it's getting tighter on us, I think. And so as we look forward, and I'm right on my screen, I have the consideration of the future requirements of the CIP as we consider the joint school system and the needs in terms of growth and building capacity. It's pretty significant. And so you know, how we meet those needs, well, it's going to happen through growth in revenue. And I think this community is very, very keenly aware that our revenues principally come from visitation and spending and lodging and dining, and thus was the initiative to support new infrastructure in Williamsburg that would attract more people to Williamsburg in terms of sports. And then the opportunity to have a live performance venue, while it's in the horizon, it's not been agreed to or funded, but you know, again, that's an opportunity for us to drive visitation, which puts people in hotel rooms and restaurants, which then drive revenue that support our community and the needs and the expectations. And so with that, I thank you for the budget, and I'll turn to Mr. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Trivett, Ms. Dameron, and all the city staff who contributed to putting this budget together. Mr. Trivett, I appreciate your explanation on assessments. I think a couple key points I think might also be beneficial is there are state codes that require that the properties be assessed at 100% value. But I think another thing that's key in what we see in the other localities is we do the assessments every year where other localities choose to do it at different intervals. So while that's why some of our neighboring localities are seeing 29, 30% increases this year, it's because they haven't been assessed in a couple years. So I think that's important for the community to recognize. On the school system, with the additional funding, I believe a good portion of that they're requesting is for teacher pay increases. And I believe they're trying to develop a plan where they've been raising starting salaries to attract new teachers, but now they're trying to work towards holding on to the teachers they have. So the ones with 10 years or more, they're going to fairly compensate them as best they can. And that's what they're asking from the localities.
Yes, I think that's a big portion of it. I mean, without getting too deep into the weeds, if you work for local government in Virginia, whether you're a teacher or not, you're likely part of the Virginia retirement system. And as you approach the retirement horizon, they calculate your payout based on the highest grossing last 3 years, right? And so as you advance in your career, it starts to become important to look around at what could I make if I were the exact same teacher with the exact same duties at some other school district. And while it may not seem that a $2,000, $3,000, or $5,000 raise is that important, when you're talking about what you're going to earn post-retirement, it can be very important. And so I think that's the reason why it's not just important to look at what that starting teacher salary is, but also what it looks like as you progress through the career, because you do want to retain them right to the end.
Also on the education side, to your point about the CIP, I mean, one of the projects we're talking about now is the pre-K facilities. When we originally started discussing those projects several years ago, it was estimated 25 million, then it went to 29 million. Now I believe it's in the price range of 42 million for 2 pre-K facilities. So that's just another example of what the CIP, the school CIP may look like in the near future.
That's right.
Also on the employee compensation, I think that's extremely important, as we know since COVID has been hard to attract employees and in some instances maintain the current staff that we have. And also noticed in the performance metrics that in 23, the turnover was over 18%. So another reason to increase. I know sometimes there's some criticism about increasing pay, but we have to in order to keep positions staffed and to keep the talent that we already have. So not a question, just another point.
That's a good observation.
And then one thing that we had discussed as a council with you previously is maybe with another comp plan update and maybe looking at using an outside consultant. I'm not asking for you to put it in this budget, but maybe that we have some future discussion about that, what it would look like and how much it might cost, and then we could consider it at a later date because of a lot of what's been going on lately that we see a need to maybe update that plan.
Certainly.
Yeah, and I would just follow up on that. I think when we looked at the last plan that was done, part of it got delayed because of COVID, and so I think there were some concerns about people's ability to participate during that time. And so I would agree that it's probably time that we revisit updating the comprehensive plan, though it is out of cycle. But I think because of where we've been in the last, well, certainly not in the last 2 years, but during COVID, so the 4 years, it may be time to do that. And I would agree, having seen several comp plans with Ms. Murphy over the years as a planning commissioner and a council member. It takes a lot of time, a lot of toll on staff, and so maybe an outside person to come in and help would be prudent. I have no idea what that costs, but, so if you and staff would, I would agree with the Vice Mayor, take the opportunity to look in some next steps for us to consider, I would appreciate that.
Sure.
And before I turn it over, I wanted to make an observation. I believe it's still on our website that any resident who wants to play with the budget, there's a tool on there where you can, predict your revenue, cut your expenses, and try to balance the budget, which I think is a fun tool. So I guess it's probably attached to the budget somewhere.
Linked off the budget website.
Yeah, it's good. So I hope everybody takes an opportunity to play with that. Thank you. I apologize.
Stacy.
Oh, Stacy. Out of sight, out of mind, but I see you now.
Forgetting about me. I'm here. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. City Manager, for the explanation and the really clear presentation, and everyone who puts an enormous amount of work into putting this together. And I just want to echo, I won't restate the comments of the mayor and the vice mayor, but I just wanted to add, really, when I was studying this and going through this and kind of thinking like, wow, this doesn't, this isn't, I think we used the term sort of like a vanilla budget. And I would say like, it kind of felt like that in a way, like we are continuing what we need to do in order to, pay for the services that, our residents certainly expect and deserve. And I think that, one thing that I also really appreciated was the clarity regarding, the sports complex and the funding stream for that project versus the other projects that we have that we're embarking upon. And so I'm thinking, some folks out there might be like, wow, this doesn't look vanilla because we are, we have a 4.5 million increase in non-discretionary spending, and where does that come from? And I just, I kind of want to kind of come back to, how we are in this moment of having these really important generational projects, the fire station, the police station, the library. Yeah, those are expensive projects, and I think that we're looking at them and we're embarking on this in a responsible way, and really thinking about how we just happen to be in this time, in this place where we do have these big projects that we are embarking upon, but we have to, for our city. And what is more important than a fire station, a police station, and a library? So I'm grateful for the work that has gone into really mapping out how can we do this in this time all so close together. But the fact is that these buildings, the previous fire station, the police station now, and the library, as you mentioned, they have, reached the end of their useful life. And so in a perfect world, would we be able to spread out all of these projects over time and maybe not feel them like quite so acutely? Maybe, but that's not really where we are. And so I hope that as when we move forward in the budget process and folks look at the budget, that they really see how we are continuing, the daily work that we need to make sure that our city runs and our residents get the services that they need and that they deserve, while at the same time, really addressing these generational needs that we have, and doing those two things at the same time with a real eye on how can we do it responsibly, and make sure that everybody understands how we're doing it. So I thank you for really laying out the different priorities that we're having, because we really are moving on two tracks and moving on the day-to-day, keeping the daily trains going, while also having our eye on buildings and projects that will last, decades and decades. So it's an exciting time, and it can be, I think, exciting times can also sometimes be scary times. But I think that what we have here is a blueprint for really a good way to move forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Kernshire. Apologize for missing you.
That's all right. Nobody's gonna let you forget about me, Mayor.
We'd never forget about you, Stacy.
That's right.
So, I would like to echo my thanks for all the hard work that staff has put together for the budget. And it's been a few of these now that I've gone through the process and feel like I have a little better understanding And again, can appreciate all y'all said. And just a couple things to echo on what the Vice Mayor said. You know, we talk about school increases and increases for teachers, and I had someone today ask me sort of about that because his wife is a teacher, and he said, you know, one of the things that they're really struggling with is the health insurance cost. We talk about a pay increase of 3.74%, I think, but if health insurance goes up 4%, then our educators are in the hole for the year. And I think it makes it doubly hard for us to know where that funding needs to go when we don't have a state budget yet. And because hopefully there will be additional funding coming from the General Assembly. And if I remember correctly, last year the state didn't approve a budget until late June, mid-June, and it has to be done by July, but by then we've already adopted our budget, so it makes our process harder to do. And the other thing is the cost of construction and just everyday projects, not only for the pre-K, but it seems that every project that we've had come through, whether it be for, you know, paving the roads or putting up lights or doing anything, is far greater than what had been originally budgeted, and we can be very thankful that our staff has found ways to help lessen the burden on us with various grants. And I think we'll be seeing a couple of those on Thursday. So thankful for that. And you know, we talk about the CIP, and for those in the audience who came to talk about one thing, I want to be sure, you know, we talk in acronyms a lot, but CIP stands for Capital Improvement Projects, and those are the transformational projects within any city organization. And so not only do we have, you know, the police station coming up, and we have the sports complex that's being funded through the tourism, but we have a lot of other projects there, and I would like staff to see if there might be a way to relook at some of the priority of those projects, to consider trying to move up the schedule for a sidewalk along South Henry Street. As many of you all know, the sidewalk ends at College Landing Park, and there is nothing that goes out to 199. And as the Colonial Parkway has been closed and as weather has improved, there are a lot of, well, I'm out on there pretty much daily, and I see pedestrians there. The speed limit is not adhered to, and I just worry that cars going around those curves too fast are going to hit someone. If the weather's bad, then, you know, there's not really room. So if there is a way to try and move that project forward, I hope my council members will agree that to try and do that. And we also pointed out the value with our tourism projects for driving revenue and bringing in overnight visitation, but I don't think we should forget the value that they bring to our residents, whether it be, you know, once the sports complex is finished, people won't have to drive halfway across the country. Hopefully some of those competition events will be right here in Williamsburg. Once the live performance venue is built, we will not only bring in different groups, but it will improve the quality of life and add to the amenities here. Once we get the children's park, but we know that all of those things cost money. So my other request for staff to look at is there a way for us to capitalize on exterior funding, private funding, money that's been available through state and national organizations, through the governments, particularly for the 250th coming up. We know that Williamsburg is going to be at the center of that celebration, and we'd like to get as far along as we can on some of these projects, and perhaps it's time for us to look at a consultant who could help us identify grants, identify ways to tap into that funding to make us not have as much of a burden on the city budget. So those are just a couple of requests one for priority and one for consideration as we move forward.
Thank you, and first want to say thank you to staff for developing this budget. I did get to walk in the room with Director Dameron, so I know that the stress is not done yet, but upon adoption in May, then we'll be there. So this is a significant step on that way. I don't know if I would consider it a vanilla budget. I don't have requests for review or allocation from what council will see in May. Certainly the ideas proposed, I think, are all very good ones. But what I see in it is, if anything, it need to address the burgeoning but manageable size of our public debt. $94.1 million annual city budget this year, and a debt size of $39.9 million. That sounds like a lot. It is a lot of money, but I am heartened by the fact that we have complete debt service met this year and have plans for, with increases in tourism, an ability to meet those transformational projects that are to come, including other existing funds that can meet projects such as the sports complex. Not only that, but we haven't had to tap into some of the, speaking of grant funding, federal money that the city saw from ARPA, which will be able to go towards city initiatives in other areas, potentially kickstarting the live performing arts venue, seed investments in affordable housing. So while I see that the city's budget is growing under our tenure, I think that is done to try to meet the fact that we recognize Williamsburg does rely, as has been mentioned, on tourism and visitation. And I think the investments that we're putting in today to meet the visitation of tomorrow that we're trying to achieve through new assets, such as performing arts venue, sports complex, is doable. So I see this budget as maybe vanilla. I think most people just care about what's the change in the real estate tax rate, and obviously there is none, but also pretty exciting because we're able to invest, credit to councils before us, on strong fiscal management policy in exciting projects for the future. So no recommendations or requests, but I think a good budget.
I have what Mr. Rogers said just reminded me. So when I was talking about, someone, consultant to look at funding opportunities, I think the best place for that is to look at our tourism fund, because the projects are primarily tourism drivers, but as I said, will benefit all residents of Williamsburg as well. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ms. Ramsey. I was going to make that suggestion as well. I've talked about, it seems that Williamsburg has a lot of philanthropic people around, and some that might support some of the initiatives that we've have, and some of the things that we've talked about aren't necessarily principal responsibility of government, with manufacturing water and that kind of stuff, but providing economic opportunities certainly is, and if there was an opportunity, particularly as you look at the live performance venue, there may be organizations out there that could help raise money, or even the library, for example. There may be opportunities beyond the library trustees, friends of the library, to find additional funds to support building something that we all can be proud of versus just something that meets the requirements. And so having that opportunity exist is certainly worth looking into, and I think the funding source that Ms. Ramsey suggested is a good one. And certainly, the sidewalk along South Henry Street is something that's been on the agenda for a long time, and if there's a way to make that happen, I think that would make a lot of people happy. Ms. Kern-Shear was talking about generational buildings, and I'm reminded that a lot of what we see today happened many years ago, but I believe our water filtration plant was supported and built by federal dollars at the time. It didn't require local dollars. All the housing that we have in our housing authority was built by federal dollars. Those dollars don't exist today to the extent that we saw them then. But certainly the expansion of the library, the fire station, police station, all were built during an unprecedented time of growth in our revenue with the implementation of room and meals tax. Before that, the tax rate, I believe, was 77 cents. But when we started implementing, lodging tax and meals tax, we were able to drop the real estate tax down to 50 cents. And so there was a lot of money coming in that supported these things. And so today's a little different day, but those obligations still exist. So, thank you. So I think you got a little bit of work to do for time coming. Any other comments? Good. Well, thank you. Mr. Kernscher, anything? Nope. All right. So that takes us to council communications. Anything for anybody?
Well, the only thing I would like to bring up is Vice Mayor Dent and I serve on the Williamsburg Public Art Council, and would just like to remind everyone that a mural is in progress out Midtown, the Marshall's Wall, and we anticipate him finishing this week to have an unveiling and a reception to which the entire public is invited on Friday evening at 5:30, I think. So, pretty exciting.
He is working hard. He had some rain damage one day.
Goodness.
Yeah, nice guy.
Okay, takes us now to a second open forum. If anybody would like to come forward and speak. Yes, ma'am. Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Karen Nelson, 124 Richmond Hill Court. Thank you for the budget presentation. I went through a lot of it, and I just have a couple of comments and questions. My first comment is related to the Sports Center, and it would be possible in the future with the budget, in this budget forum a year from now, for instance, that we're provided with detail on the budget and the actual operating costs and the budget for the Sports Center, since we, the city of Williamsburg, are obligated to make up any differences. So if there's shortfalls, I understand we get tax revenues, but we are obligated to make up any differences in the operating costs, in addition to our two other municipalities, but we're the swing factor there. In addition, we are more, if the debt goes forward, it's right now proposed as a general moral obligation, which we are basically, for all intents and purposes, would be on the hook, because I don't think the city of Williamsburg would ever want to default on a debt issue, ramifications for us. So I just think it would be very helpful if they were on some sort of schedule where they could submit a similar mini version of this, because that is a swing factor. And then I also would like, these are just small little, what you've done is a massive effort here, and as a former corporate finance person, I totally appreciate what you've done. A couple things, it looks like there's a little inconsistency on the reporting of the staffing of the city manager's office. So some places on page D2, you list city manager as 10, and human resources is 1, and economic development is 3 for 14. But on other pages, it's the total staffing is 10 with economic development and human resources. So maybe you do want it that way. Maybe that was wishful thinking. But between pages D2 and D5 in particular, that's just a small thing. I totally, having been in your shoes, I'm not for a city, I can relate to that. And just the other thing, and is in some of the exhibits, the chronology goes to the outer years, like 29 or whatever. You start with the most recent year going out, and then on some of the exhibits, it's the complete reverse. So you just have to be attentive when you're looking at that. So it would be, I mean, there may have been a reason why you flipped the years around and have the more recent one further out on the page, but it would just improve the readability. But this was really very clear, and I thank you, and those are just little nits.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Nelson, and pointing out some of that. Would anybody else like to come forward? Yes, ma'am. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Mary O'Leary. I'm a student here at William & Mary, junior pre-med, and I'm also the president of one of the sororities we have in our Pan-Hellenic community. I'm here to stress my concerns about how this change in police presence and intervention is going to have, and has already started to have, a negative impact on the safety and well-being of the students here at William & Mary, rather than a positive one. As the chief mentioned before, him along with the rest of the police force are concerned about student safety, and that is fantastic. However, by making it incredibly difficult for the students to partake in social events outside of William & Mary, they are creating a divide and distrust with the students here. I'm a firm believer that telling someone, especially young college students, not to do something will not make them stop. College students are still going to be partaking in social gatherings with alcohol, but they're going to be pushed into an underground scene that will limit the ability for students to work with the police in a constructive and safe way. Rather, I believe that teaching people how to participate in safe drinking and the resources that are available to them provide a safer social environment. I would love to hear more from the police department and the Williamsburg community's plan to do this, rather than just placing the task on William & Mary to do so, because all I've seen so far is the shutting down of parties. Furthermore, in regards to last day classes or blowout, I would like to know how students can participate in social activities that may include drinking on blowout in a safe way. The chief noted an incident on Lafayette on the last day of classes in the fall, and how the party began to flood into the front yard and was blocking traffic. To the best of my knowledge, students went to Lafayette because an initial party that was hosted at a house on Richmond Road was shut down quite early in the day. This kind of forced intoxicated people out into the streets and were walking about trying to find something else to do with their day, whether that be go back onto campus intoxicated or over to Lafayette. The house that initially had a party had ample space for all these students. Again, you can't control everyone, so it likely did put out a little bit, but it can be contained and has been held there in years past. Lafayette, that house on there was not big enough for this, and that was why people were flooding into the streets and walking around. I'm not exactly sure why that initial party got shut down. However, as it was quite early in the day, so I'm asking how we can plan to partake in safe procedures in hosting or attending events on last day of classes. I'm wondering if they're all just going to be shut down immediately, like they've been rumored to in the past, few weeks, or if there will just be extra police presence for our safety, which has been stated before as the main priority. Caleb, I'd like to thank you for touching on this before, as you've been a student here. In years past, police presence is always larger on last day of classes, which is great, and I thank them for that and the safety. I think it allows students to have the ability to go to them in case there's, something negative were to happen. I know Caleb was an incredibly successful and smart student at William & Mary, so I hope you guys listen to his thoughts on the matter as well. I just want to say, to wrap up, we're a smart group of students. This is not a party school, and we've never claimed to be. With William & Mary being such a rigorous school, the small social scene that we do have here in Williamsburg is what keeps us afloat. Students' mental health, I believe, is at risk here if they are unable to socialize, as college students should be able to do. I hope that we can work together and the opinions and experiences of the students here are taken into account so we can create a safe environment for all the students. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Anybody else like to come forward? Welcome.
Hello again, Mr. Mayor and council members. This will be my last time talking. Apologies. My name is Will Katabian again. I live at 208 Harrison Avenue. I'll be brief. I'd like to apologize first for extending this meeting. It's a beautiful day. So thank you for hearing me. And I am just here speaking for transparency's sake. I had just spoken with the chief outside of those doors, addressed some of my concerns. My biggest problem, I'm a little bit off the script now, but my biggest problem with the discussion as it went is I don't want things to be pointed at blowout last day classes. That's not what our goal is. We want to have blowout. The reason I stand before you today is not because I really want to drink at blowout. It's because I don't feel safe. My colleagues don't feel safe on campus anymore. So I brought these concerns directly to the chief, and he accepted them openly, very respectful. I think it was a very good conversation. And the scope of which again, I'm sharing with you for transparency's sake before I leave, is we feel as though we're being targeted. I have my own anecdotal example. I won't go too far into detail, but my house was written up for a noise complaint like many others. Nothing out of the ordinary. In fact, again, for transparency's sake, we certainly deserved it. The problem is my ticket, written at 11:02 on the 1272 ordinance, which is the past 11 p.m., no problems there, is different than my housemate's tickets. We received 5, and they range from 10:30 up until 11:02. Mine's the latest one. And when presented, the officer there said that he got the call at 11:07. Luckily, we hired a lawyer, and we were all off. No problem there. And even that is fine. Mistakes happen with these tickets. The problem is, and this is what I see, it seems to be a pattern, is when I'm leaving, another officer who I won't name comes up behind us and, shoots a few chirps our way, which doesn't feel like you care about me when you do something like that. The quote, "We're going to get you next time. You guys got lucky this time. Watch out." Stuff like that. That's scary as a student. I don't have a gun, right? It's a scary spot to be in. I have plenty more quotes. That one's anecdotal. Things like party getting shut down at 10 o'clock. The office saying, "Proud to say in my 17 years of service, I can't even count how many times I've shut this party down. We're going to be back next time. We're going to ID you. We're going to arrest you. People are leaving the party trying to get home safe. 10 o'clock. You better hurry home. We're going to get you. We're going to come get you. We know you're drunk." This, that, and the other. Students are scared. Luckily, we're here to speak for ourselves, but for those who aren't here, myself and the people here are going to speak for them. This is not fair. And I understand that the police have that responsibility to keep us safe, and I respect it. And the chief, very well spoken. I believe everything he said. I respect him. However, you and I both know he can't control the actions of the police department, but I'm sure they respect him, and he has a say. And so I believe that in the future we'll work together to find a compromise, to find a way that we can both coexist here, because quite frankly, things are getting a little out of hand. And I understand that laws are being broken and things might need to change, but the way it's been going about is not fair. So with that, I'll leave you. Again, I really appreciate your consideration and the ability to be able to speak here in general. It's something that I think we all appreciate. I, for a while, didn't know how to voice my concerns, so it's good to have this outlet. So with that, I'll leave you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak? Sir.
Try to keep this short. All right. My name is Sean Kersey. I'm a William Mary student. I'm an econ major. And I want to thank you all for letting me speak here today. I wanted to start by sharing some anecdotes. I did not witness any of these firsthand, but I heard these from a friend who heard them from acquaintances. Both of these occurred in the last week on Richmond Road. First, a homeless man physically assaulted a female who was running with her track team. And also, in the same area, at a different time, someone was shoved by a random man. To share some other anecdotes that I've read about, I've heard that random people, not students, have on multiple occasions harassed the girls in sorority court. Now, I would think that these sorts of incidents would be of concern to the Williamsburg Police Department. The goal of the police department, I would say, is to protect and serve the community, but instead the police department has sunk more effort and resources into policing students about their drinking and the social scene. And rather than focusing on safety, they have focused on punishing students by stopping them if they appear intoxicated, in some cases infringing on their rights. If the police continue this course, students will be more encouraged to drink in smaller settings, where less people may be aware if they need help until it's too late. And that's just not safe for anybody. We want to be able to party in a safer fashion and not have this become some underground sort of thing like somebody else just mentioned. And students will be less safe. As a student, I feel as though the strained community relations between students and other Williamsburg residents have only exacerbated this situation. I'm not looking to antagonize the residents of this town. I'm sure none of us are either. Us students just want to have the social life that a lot of Williamsburg's residents themselves most likely experienced when they were our age. We don't want to have to fear social events being shut down before 11 when the noise ordinance does not start before 11 because of Williamsburg residents maybe calling the police, or maybe Williamsburg police officers are over patrolling the neighborhoods in Williamsburg. We want to get along with the Williamsburg community and not feel antagonized by its residents. We want to be included as a part of the Williamsburg community. I mean, we have to live here. I mean, the housing situation on campus is already pretty bad. Not everyone, it is not possible to fit all the students on campus, so people have to live, or some students have to live off campus. So we just want to be like, have our voices and concerns heard, because we are also citizens and residents too. So I'm begging for the police department to like, I think that this trying to, use these fear tactics, it's just not helpful. It comes off sometimes as harassment, and I think there's a lot of more constructive ways for y'all to be dealing with this, or not y'all, I'm sorry. I think there are more constructive ways for the police to go about trying to make sure that students are safe. And, because like at the end of the day, laws are being, it's, like obviously, there is, it's hard to stop underage drinking, even if you tell students not to do it. But what I think is most important at the end of the day is that we're all safe. And I think that the way Williamsburg police are currently approaching this is actually just making this less safe for us all. And I'm also concerned because I feel like Williamsburg police are putting almost too much effort into policing the underage drinking and not enough effort into some of these other issues that occur in the community, as some of the anecdotes that I shared earlier. So I also hope that as students we can develop better relations with the community at large. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Seeing none, I'll close the open forum, and I believe, Mr. Vice Mayor, we have a matter for closed session.
We do. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions, and one legal matter per subparagraph 8 for the purpose of consultation on specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning a contract.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kerntier?
Ms. Kerntier?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll go into closed session, and once that concludes, we'll come back into open session. Okay, I declare us back in open session.
I move to approve the certification of a closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia.
Second?
Okay,
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernscher?
Aye.
okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Okay,
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
aye,
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernscher?
Aye.
thank you. We are adjourned.